Claude responded. The phone rang at 11:52 on a Tuesday night, the kind of late that means something's wrong before anyone says a word. The phone rang at 11:52 on a Tuesday night, the kind of late that means something's wrong before anyone says a word. I was on the back porch with a cup of decaf gone cold in my hand, because my doctor keeps telling me caffeine after 6 is a bad idea for a man my age, and I keep ignoring him except when I remember to feel guilty about it. My hip had been stiff all day from the cold front coming through, so I'd stayed out there in the dark a while just listening to the wind move through the pecan trees. I almost didn't hear the phone over the screen door. When I saw her name on the screen, I picked up before the second ring. Sweetheart hardly ever calls that late, not since she moved out on her own. All I got at first was breathing, fast and shallow. Then, Grandpa. Something about the way she said that one word put every nerve in my body on alert. I'm here, I said. Talk to me. He followed me home. He's outside my apartment. I don't know what to do. I didn't raise my voice. 34 years wearing a badge teaches you that panic is contagious, and so is calm, and you get to choose which one you hand somebody. Are your doors locked? Yes. Good girl. Stay away from the windows. Another sound came through, someone pounding, not on her door but close, a car door maybe, or a fist against a railing. Sweetheart, where are you right now? Bathroom. I locked myself in the bathroom. Outside her apartment, a man's voice rose, muffled but clear enough. Kayla, open the door. We need to talk about this like adults. He said it easy, almost friendly, like he was inviting her to dinner instead of standing in a parking lot at midnight where he had no business being. I knew that voice. Not personally, I'd never trust him enough to call it personal, but I knew the shape of it. I'd spent 3 decades listening to men explain why the woman in front of them owed them an explanation. It's always reasonable sounding right up until it isn't. Has he ever hit you? I asked. No, not no. Has he threatened you tonight? A pause too long for comfort. He said if I keep ignoring him, he's going to make sure I regret it. That was enough. Listen to me carefully. I'm coming. It's 40 minutes, maybe 35 if the roads are clear. You are not opening that door for any reason. If he tries to force it, you call 911 first, then you call me back. You understand? Grandpa, I don't want this to be a whole thing. Kayla. I hadn't used her full name like that in years, not since she was 12 and climbing where she shouldn't. It already is a thing. Let me handle it. I grabbed my keys off the hook by the door, my knee complaining the whole way to the truck. My wife used to say I babied that old Silverado more than I babied our children, and maybe she wasn't wrong, but it started every time, and that mattered more tonight than it ever had. I backed out of the driveway and caught a glance at the porch light glowing over the steps, the one I'd left burning every single night for the better part of 6 years now, ever since Diane passed. She used to say, you never know who's trying to find their way home in the dark. I never questioned that habit. Tonight I was grateful for it, because it meant I could see the road clear as I pulled away, and somewhere on the other side of the county, I hope to God somebody was leaving a light on for my granddaughter too. I called my son on the way, Kayla's father, but he and his wife were 3 states over visiting her folks for the week, and there wasn't time to explain the whole situation and still make it to Millbrook before things got worse. I told him enough. Kayla's in some trouble. A man named Grant is outside her building. I'm heading there now. I'll call the second I know more. He wanted to get in the car right then. I told him to wait for my call first. No sense in 2 men driving reckless through the dark over the same fear. The drive gave me too much time to think, which is never a good thing at that hour. I thought about the last time I'd met this Grant fellow, maybe 4 months back at a cookout Kayla threw for her birthday. Polished. That's the word that stuck with me. Polished shoes, polished handshake, polished way of laughing at every joke a half second after everybody else, like he was checking to see which reaction would land best. I didn't say anything to Kayla about it then. 28 years old, she doesn't need her grandfather sizing up every man she brings around like he's running a background check, even though, technically, sizing people up had been my whole career. By the time I turned onto her street, the porch light of her building was the only thing lit besides a street lamp with half its bulb burned out. No car in the visitor spot that shouldn't have been there. I circled the block once out of old habit, and there, parked 2 doors down under a dead oak tree, sat a black pickup with the engine running, dark. Somebody sitting in it, not moving, watching her building. I've spent enough hours of my life watching people who are watching other people to recognize the posture. That wasn't a man debating whether to knock. That was a man deciding how much longer he could get away with being there. I parked on the opposite side, walked up slow, and knocked on her door instead of the truck window. She opened it fast, threw both arms around my neck before I even got a word out, and I felt her shaking against my chest the way she used to when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. "He's still out there," she whispered. "I saw him." I set my hand on the back of her head, the way I used to when she'd wake up crying as a little girl, and nobody but Grandpa's chair would settle her down. "You're safe now, I promise you that." She pulled back and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her since she was a teenager caught in a lie. "Grandpa, there's something I should have told you a long time ago." I sat her down at the kitchen table, put the kettle on because some habits from Diane never leave a man, and told her to start from the beginning. It came out slow, the way these things do. Grant hadn't started out controlling. Nobody like that ever does. He'd started out attentive, remembering her coffee order, showing up with her favorite takeout on bad days, telling her none of her friends understood her the way he did. Small things, at first, coming in. He didn't like her working late shifts at the clinic. He didn't like her having a drink with coworkers after a hard day. He started asking why she needed so many passwords if she had nothing to hide. He told her it hurt his feelings when she laughed too easily with other men, even the harmless ones, even her own cousin. He used to say I was too sensitive, she said, staring into her mug. That I read too much into things. "You didn't," I said. He moved the line slow enough that you wouldn't notice it moving. Her eyes filled. "I teach kids in a doctor's office how to recognize when something's wrong with their bodies, Grandpa. I should have recognized it in my own life." "You did recognize it," I told her. "You're sitting here telling me about it." "That's recognizing it." She wiped her face with the back of her hand and told me about tonight. She'd finally told him 3 weeks ago that it was over, that she needed space. And for a while it had been quiet, almost too quiet, and she'd started to believe he'd accepted it. Then tonight, she left the clinic late and he'd been parked across the street from her building when she pulled in, waiting like he had all the time in the world. I let a silence sit there a minute before I said what I'd been carrying since the drive over. "Kayla, there's something about me you don't fully know either." She looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "You worked construction, then you retired." "I worked construction for the last 9 years before I retired," I said. "Before that, for 25 years, I was a United States Marshal." The kitchen went dead quiet except for the kettle ticking as it cooled. Dad never said anything about that." "Your father knows. We didn't talk about it much at home. Your grandmother asked me a long time ago not to bring that work to our dinner table, and I kept that promise even after she passed. It wasn't the kind of work I wanted following you kids around." "What did you even do?" "Fugitive recovery, mostly. Witness protection details. A few years running protective details for federal judges getting threats. It wasn't like the movies. 90% paperwork and patience, watching, waiting, knowing when to move and when not to." I reached across and took her hand. "But I know men like Grant. I spent a career chasing them. They don't want love. They want ownership. And the second it starts slipping, they call it betrayal, and they get ugly trying to win it back." She looked at me like she was seeing something new stitched into a person she thought she already knew completely. "So, what do we do?" "We don't play his game," I said. "We build one instead." Her phone buzzed on the table between us. Unknown number. A photograph loaded slow over bad signal, the front entrance of the clinic where she worked, taken from across the parking lot, her name badge visible clipped to the door where she always left it hanging on the hook by the front desk. Underneath, a caption. "Didn't think I knew your schedule?" She went white. "I can't go to work tomorrow." "You can," I said. "We're just going to make sure it's safe first." By 8 the next morning, I'd called an old colleague of mine, still working the county sheriff's department, a deputy named Marcus Webb, who used to be a green young recruit I trained 20 years back, now a family man himself with a bad back and a good reputation. He came out to Kayla's building, looked over the messages and the photo on her phone, wrote everything down in that slow, careful hand deputies use when they know something's going to matter later. "I'm taking this seriously, Ray," he told me in the parking lot. "I figured you would. But I'm not cutting corners just because you used to wear the badge yourself. I'd be disappointed in you if you did." He turned to Kayla. "Ma'am, save every message. Don't respond, don't delete anything. If he shows up anywhere near you, you call 911 first, not your grandfather, not your father. 911 first." She nodded, arms wrapped tight around herself the way her grandmother used to stand when she was worried, though Kayla never knew her long enough to have learned it from her directly. Some things just travel down through a family without anybody teaching them on purpose. By that afternoon, my younger brother Walt showed up with a toolbox, 2 folding chairs, and a styrofoam container of barbecue from the place off Route 9 he swore beat anything in 3 counties. Walt moves like a man built out of spare parts these days. Bad knee, bad shoulder, a hip that clicks louder than his truck door, but he can still wire a security camera faster than most men half his age. "Heard we're setting up old man surveillance," he said, setting his toolbox down on Kayla's little patio. "Brought sandwiches. Priorities." Kayla smiled for the first time since the night before. It wasn't much, but I'd take it. Her neighbor, a retired dispatcher named Ruth who'd worked emergency calls for almost 30 years, came over with a notebook and the kind of eyes that had heard every version of fear a human voice could produce. She pointed out the blind spot by the parking garage stairwell before Walt had even finished his first sandwich, told him exactly where the second camera needed to go, and rolled her eyes when he asked if she was always this bossy. "Alive because of it," she said. For a few hours that afternoon, Kayla's little apartment complex turned into a quiet operation. Walt running cable, Ruth checking angles on her phone, me walking the perimeter, noting where headlights would sweep the lot after dark, and where a man convinced of his own invisibility might choose to stand. Kayla trailed behind me at one point, arms crossed against the cold. "You think he'll actually come back?" "I think he wants you to believe he might every hour of every day. That's the whole game for men like him." That's not really an answer. "No," I admitted. But it's the truth. That night, after Walt and Ruth had gone home, Kayla and I sat on her little balcony with paper plates of barbecue on our knees, and for a stretch of maybe 20 minutes, Grant didn't own the air around us at all. She told me about a patient at the clinic, a 7-year-old who'd drawn her a picture of a dinosaur wearing a stethoscope. I told her about the time her father, as a boy, tried to convince a Little League umpire he was actually 11 months older than his birth certificate said. She laughed for real, the kind that surprises a person out of their own worry for a second. Then the parking lot light clicked on below us, and we both went quiet at the same time, listening to the same silence. The next morning, I stepped out early to walk the lot again while the mist still sat low over the parked cars, and something near the bottom of the stairwell caught the corner of my eye. Small, silver, half tucked against the concrete. My stomach dropped before my mind caught up to why. It was a bracelet. Thin silver chain, a small charm shaped like a stethoscope. The clasp snapped clean through. I recognized it instantly. I'd given it to her the day she graduated nursing school. And Diane had cried through every photograph that afternoon, though she wasn't alive to see it by the time Kayla actually walked the stage. Behind me, Kayla's voice, tight and small. "Grandpa." She'd come down looking for me and stopped cold when she saw what I was holding. "He was here," she whispered. "Last night. He was right here. Not yelling, not banging on a door. Just close enough to leave something behind that said, without a single word, I can reach you whenever I decide to." I closed my hand around the broken chain and felt something harden in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart condition. The anatomy of a man like Grant is simple, and I'd studied it my whole career. He tests a boundary quietly first, then waits to see who's willing to enforce it. By that afternoon, Ruth had the stairwell footage pulled up on her laptop at Kayla's kitchen table, one hand on the mouse, the other around a mug of coffee she'd reheated twice and hadn't touched once. Walt leaned against the counter, eating cold barbecue for breakfast like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stood behind Ruth's chair and watched the screen. "There," she said, freezing the frame. Grainy, but clear enough. 2:19 in the morning, a dark sedan idling at the far end of the lot with its headlights off. A figure got out, hood pulled low, moved across the pavement with the unhurried confidence of a man who'd studied the place beforehand. He crouched at the bottom of the stairwell, set something down, and then this was the part that turned my stomach. He stood there for almost 15 seconds afterward, staring up toward Kayla's window, like he wanted the camera, or God, or somebody, to know he'd been there. Walt stopped chewing. "That's not a man trying to win his girlfriend back." "No," I said. "That's a man building pressure." Kayla, standing in the doorway, asked quietly, "What does that mean?" "It means he wants you scared enough to come running back to him before he ever has to raise his voice." She sat down hard in the kitchen chair. "You don't know he's done this to anyone else." "No," I agreed. "But men like Grant rarely invent themselves from nothing." That sentence was what started the paper trail. I spent the rest of that day doing the part of the job that never makes it into any movie public records, Old addresses, civil filings, small claims history, court dockets going back years, anything legal and slow and boring from the outside, but useful as bedrock once you stacked enough of it together. Kayla sat across from me, making her own list, every incident she could remember. The first time he asked for her passwords, the first joke about tracking her location for safety, the night he put his fist through his own drywall and told her she'd made him do it. By early evening, one name surfaced from a dismissed protective order filed 4 years earlier, 2 counties, over a woman named Priya Anand. Dismissed doesn't mean false. Sometimes dismissed just means a person got scared before it went any further. Grant's old address history put him 2 blocks from where Priya had lived that same year. Ruth still had contacts from her dispatch days who knew people. Nobody broke any rules. Nobody handed over anything private. But by that night, we had a number that used to belong to a small photography business. Priya once ran out of her house. Kayla stared at it on the notepad. "You're going to call her?" "No," I said. "You're not ready for that conversation yet, and she may not want to have it at all." So we asked politely, once, and we let her decide. I texted carefully. "My name is Raymond Whitfield. My granddaughter recently ended things with a man named Grant Ashworth. Your name came up in an old court filing. I won't reach out again if you'd rather not respond, but if you're willing to talk, it might help keep her safe." 4 minutes passed. Then her phone buzzed. "Is she safe right now?" I showed Kayla, who nodded, pale. I wrote back, "Yes, she's with me. Diner on Route 14, tomorrow 10 a.m. Not my house. Bring another woman. I don't meet men alone anymore, even old ones." Ruth read it over my shoulder and nodded once, approving. Smart lady. The diner sat wedged between a tire shop and a place selling firewood by the bundle, smelling like bacon grease and 40 years of coffee soaked into the vinyl booths. Priya arrived 7 minutes late in a gray coat buttoned to her throat, scanning the room from the doorway like she still expected danger to be seated near the pie case. Ruth lifted a hand. Priya came over but didn't sit right away. "Which one's the granddaughter?" Kayla raised her hand slightly, and Priya studied her for a long moment. Not pity, recognition. She slid into the booth, stirred sugar into coffee she never drank a drop of. "He's wonderful at first," she said. "Makes you feel like somebody finally understands you completely. Then he starts correcting your life, your clothes, your friends, your schedule, your tone of voice. Did he ever tell you your grandfather was controlling you?" Kayla's breath caught. "Yes, all the time. He always needs someone to make into the villain," Priya said. "It's never him." She told us what he'd done to her, the gifts, the isolation, the recorded conversations edited to make her sound unstable, posted in pieces to people who'd never hear her side. When she finally filed for protection, he sent her a photograph of her own front porch, taken that same morning, no caption needed. "I withdrew the filing 2 days later," she said. "I was more scared of what came after than what had already happened." Kayla reached across the table and covered her hand. "I'm so sorry." Priya looked at her for a long moment, something loosening behind her eyes. "You're not crazy," she said. "That's the first thing you need to hear. Whatever he's told you, whatever he's made you believe about yourself, you are not the unstable one in this." Kayla cried quietly, and the waitress refilled coffee and pretended not to notice, the way good waitresses in diners like that always do. We spent the following weeks doing the unglamorous work of building something Grant couldn't talk his way around: statements, documented incidents, the footage, Priya's willingness, this time, to testify to a pattern instead of walking away from it again. Deputy Webb filed for an emergency protective order. Grant's attorney, when the hearing finally came, argued that Kayla and I had orchestrated a smear campaign, that I'd used old law enforcement contacts to intimidate an innocent man. Our attorney didn't raise her voice either. She opened 3 binders, one at a time. Text messages, time-stamped photographs and security stills, public filings, and a sworn statement from a second woman with the same story 4 years apart. Facts don't need volume. Stacked together, they carry their own weight. Ruth testified about the footage, how the cameras stored everything automatically, an unbroken digital timestamp nobody could dispute. Deputy Webb testified that he treated Grant and me exactly the same throughout the investigation, that knowing me for 20 years had made him more careful, not less. Priya walked to the stand and told the whole courtroom what she'd told us in that diner booth. Calm and steady this time, no longer running. Then they called Kayla. She looked at me before she stood. I nodded, and for the first time in this whole ordeal, I didn't reach out to steady her. She didn't need me to answer for her anymore. She walked to the stand alone, her hands trembling as she took the oath, but her voice found its footing the moment she started speaking. She told the court about checking her phone every few minutes because he expected instant replies, about apologizing for things she hadn't done, about losing touch with friends because explaining him had become exhausting work all its own, about a stairwell at 2 in the morning and a bracelet with a broken clasp. Near the end, our attorney asked her one final question. What changed? Kayla thought about it a long moment, then smiled through tears. I realized leaving wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was believing anyone would believe me. She glanced toward me, then back to the judge. I'm not afraid to say it out loud anymore. I felt something loosen in my own chest that I'd been carrying since that phone call at 11:52 on a Tuesday night. Not relief exactly. Something steadier than that. The judge came back after a short recess and spoke without anger and without sympathy, just the plain weight of the law. He found the pattern of harassment, surveillance, and intimidation well documented and credible. He granted an extended protective order, barring Grant from any contact whatsoever, and referred the matter for separate criminal review given the corroborated pattern across 2 victims. Grant sat there in his gray suit, and for the first time since I'd laid eyes on him, he looked like a man who'd finally run out of stories that worked. Outside the courthouse, there were no cameras, no crowd, just ordinary people walking back to ordinary cars under an ordinary sky. Kayla stood beside me on the steps. It's over, she said. The legal part, I said gently. The rest of it, you keep building yourself, one good day at a time. She laughed, wet and tired and real. I know. Then she wrapped both arms around me. Thank you, Grandpa. You don't owe me thanks, I told her. You did the hardest part yourself. All I did was stand next to you while you did it. The following Saturday, Walt showed up at my place with his toolbox again, insisting on supervising the new porch railing while doing almost none of the actual work himself. Ruth came by too, rolling her eyes at him from her lawn chair, telling him he hadn't given decent advice since sometime in the last century. Kayla laughed at both of them, easy and unforced, no fear tucked underneath it anymore. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I carried 2 glasses of sweet tea out to the porch, one for myself, and one I set quietly beside Diane's old rocking chair, the way I still do most evenings, whether anybody's watching or not. The porch light glowed warm over the front steps, same as it had every night for 6 years. For a long time, I believed protecting the people I loved meant standing between them in whatever danger came. I understand something different now. Sometimes it means standing beside them until the day they're strong enough to stand entirely on their own and trusting they'll know, the way Kayla finally does, exactly who to call when the porch light is the only thing between them and the dark. Claude responded, sometimes love isn't a wall you build in front of someone, it's a light you leave on so they always know the way back. Sometimes love isn't a wall you build in front of someone, it's a light you leave on so they always know the way back. Kayla didn't need her grandfather to fight her battles. She needed him to believe her, stand beside her, and hand her the courage already hers to begin with. That's the quiet gift of family, not rescue, but steady presence, patient enough to let someone become brave on their own time. A small note for you, this story was written and fictionalized by AI purely for entertainment, though we hope its gentle lesson about patience, trust, and standing by the ones we love stays with you a little longer.